Hey there, welcome all to the Bi Plus Spaces and Communities Hour. Up first, we have Josephine Kelly, who is a writer, researcher, and multidisciplinary artist smitten by the redwood forests of the Pacific Coast. I know that feeling. They hold a master's in social work with a concentration in community mental health from Cal State East Bay and studied literature with a focus in queer feminist theory at UC Santa Cruz. Go banana slugs. They recently co-founded Ouch, which is a queer art collective based in the San Francisco Bay Area that supports and uplifts LGBTQIA plus creators. And the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna share my screen here. All right, can everyone see okay?
Yes, we got it.
All right, 1 second. Okay, so I'm really excited and honored to be here today, so thank you everyone. So I'm going to be presenting on my research that I completed at Cal State East Bay in May of this year. It's on bisexual plus and non-binary resilience and mental health, and the reason why I went with that approach is that there's so much research already about our negative mental health outcomes. And I really wanted to see what is working and what are the strengths that we already have. Also, in my research, I found that studies show that people who are LGBTQ+ tend to have better health outcomes when they have more community support and higher resilience. So again, just wanted to add on to that field of research. So I love this quote. It's from one of my participants, and it pretty much can sum up all of my findings, which is community, community, community. Everything comes down to that. In all of my data, community and social relationships and whether people felt supported or rejected was a factor in how people view their identity and also in their health outcomes. So just really wanted to emphasize that here. My survey design was in 2 parts. It was an anonymous online survey that I distributed internationally with the help of LGBTQ+ organizations and activists. And it was mostly through social media and email blasts. And the survey design is 2 parts. We had like multiple choice scale questions, and then we also had some free response where I got some narrative data. My hope was to get at least 50 responses for my humble capstone project of my master's in social work, but I ended up getting 385. Let's see. It says screen sharing is paused. Can everyone see survey demographics?
Sorry, we're still on your title slide.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop share and reshare. All right, give me 1 second. I have too many tabs open. That's what's going on here. All right. Can you see the second slide? Community, community, community.
Now we can. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So survey demographics. So I got an incredible response for this survey. So I can only kind of touch on a very small amount of findings that I got. But just a quick demographics, more than half of them were women, 20% were non-binary or another gender expansive identity, only 6 identified as men, and then the remaining identified as questioning or intersex. As far as trans identity, if someone identified as a trans woman, they were with the women category, and if they identified as non-binary trans, they were in the gender expansive category. Over 80% identified as white or of European descent. I was hoping to get a more representative sample of the BIPOC population because we're a very diverse group, but we did have some representation from people of color, also referred as people of the global majority, including people who identified as Black or more than one race or Latinx. So some key findings here. About half of the participants said they felt welcomed in the LGBT plus community. About a third said they didn't feel welcome. Over 2/3 said they didn't feel that bi-specific issues were addressed when LGBT plus issues were being talked about. About half said they could not easily access bi-specific resources. And nearly 2/3 said they did not feel that bi people were represented in LGBTQ plus leadership. Despite that, more than half were involved in social justice activism or advocacy, and about 70% were involved in activism from the non-binary, trans, and gender expansive sample. Other important things to note was that participants who felt welcomed and represented in the LGBTQ plus community had an easier time accessing bi-specific resources. And participants who felt accepted by the LGBTQ plus community and by their loved ones reported having more pride in their identity. So I feel like what we're seeing here is that connection between community support and acceptance, and then how people make meaning of their own self through their identity and through their ability to find affinity groups. So to measure resilience, I used the Connor-Davidson resilience scale on 1 to 10 point, and this measures psychological resilience. So that's a very specific definition. It's the ability to bounce back and make meaning out of adversity. The average score for my sample was 26.3, which is lower than the general population that tends to hover around 29 to 32 average. It's more comparable to people who have PTSD, where that sample or the mean average kind of hovers between 20 and 30. I feel like what we're seeing here is just the very real psychological impacts of increased victimization, chronic minority stress, and a lack of support and a lack of access to specific resources. So this is actually where my research surprised me in a good way. I was expecting that people who felt accepted and felt pride in their bi identity would have higher resilience scores, but that wasn't necessarily the case. The only thing that were, or the only variables that were statistically significant to the resilience scores were income, education, and ethnicity. And so higher income and higher levels of education were associated with higher resilience scores, with income being the highest or the strongest association. And then people of color had higher resilience scores on average than white participants. And so what these show to me is that, firstly, access to more financial security and education supports people to develop resilience so that they can get their basic needs met, and it helps reduce stress. And also that multi-marginalized groups such as Black, Indigenous, people of color will not inherently have lower resilience because of their increased victimization of systemic oppression. They might actually have higher resilience sometimes because of the ability to create and maintain affinity communities and make meaningful narratives from adversity. So the other side of resilience, some participants didn't necessarily view resilience as a positive thing, but instead of something necessary to survive or something that's been weaponized. One participant writes, "I have zero choice but to wake up each morning and be resilient because that's what my body and brain physically need, or else I would die." I wanted to include this even though it was not a majority response, because the definition of resilience in psychiatry has been really manipulated and weaponized to justify continued adversity, or to people should be strong because of the challenges and the trauma that they've been through. But what I really want to argue here is that building resilience is not about being able to be strong or to endure. It's about being able to bounce back from stress so that we as bi people can still find joy, can still thrive in our lives. And so it's not about just really powering through. It's about quality of life. And so that's why I think that despite these things being accurate, these quotes being accurate, we still should focus on building resilience, because we deserve to have less chronic stress and less adversity. And that's something that we can control. We can't always control outside. forces. So the impact of community, that was, again, the consistent theme throughout all of my work. In my narrative data, which was of non-binary and gender expansive responses, all of the responses in the narrative data included social exception or rejection as having an impact on their mental health or identity. People with experiences of community acceptance reported better mental health outcomes and quality of life, while people who had the opposite experiences of social rejection and isolation generally reported more negative outcomes and insecurity or confusion in their identity. I think that this really emphasizes the importance of family and social acceptance to support better health outcomes, which is supported by other research on our population, and also that they play a really critical role in resilience and have the potential to buffer against negative health outcomes and can act as a protective factor. All right, last slide. So this is the word bank from my research from the narrative data. And I just wanted to share it because it feels really special just to see all the most commonly held words and the most common words in these responses. And so bi and non-binary people, we still remain an underserved subgroup of the LGBTQ+ population. I feel like my research really shows the importance of community acceptance and support as a significant protective factor against negative health outcomes. It also shows the trauma of biphobia and minority stress. We didn't get into that as much today, but there was a lot of evidence there as well. I'd really like to see research like this to really put into action and policy changes, because if we look at in the United States, which is where I'm living, there are so many anti-LGBTQ policies going right now, anti-trans, and these will disproportionately impact bi youth because they tend to be more gender expansive or identify as trans. And so those policies that are, you know, not letting people play on sports teams, not letting people use the bathroom, not having access to gender affirming surgeries, these are the opposite of what the data is showing, of that people need community support, they need to feel accepted to have these better health outcomes. And so I'm really hoping to see more research on bi and non-binary populations. I really couldn't find any specific research when I was doing mine. And then I just wanted to end with saying that we have endured a lot as a community, but I really believe through community connection and support that we can change that and that we can continue to bounce back and build resilience so that we can get the things that we value in life and to just become stronger as a community to keep pushing forward these the better policy for our population. So yeah, I'll finish up there. Thank you so much for being here and listening. I think we have questions now if anyone has them. Cool, thank you, Alex.
So yes, if I may say so, I found that most of the crowd today have been kind of on the quieter side. So if you do have questions, we'll definitely field them in the Zoom chat. And as a statistics teacher, I love hearing about new to me metrics, and look forward to seeing more of your work in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And also I popped my email in the chat if anyone wants to connect, as well as my Instagram. Awesome. I'm also on the Bi Women Quarterly Instagram all the time, so repping Bi Women Quarterly, so you can reach out there too. Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Minna Laakkonen, who I believe is going to be telling us about bi-centered spaces in Finland. Go for it.
So hi, I'm also trying to share my presentation first. Okay, now it's basically okay, this is a bit on my way. Okay, now it's not. So can everyone see?
Yes, this looks like the correct slide.
Yeah, the first slide. Yeah, okay. Good evening for everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for this conference and this opportunity. This is really unique and inspiring environment to be in, and I really appreciate this. And thank you also for the previous presentation. It was extremely interesting. So the title of the presentation I am giving you tonight is Bipolar Spaces in Finland and a Sense of Belonging. Can you see the next slide now?
Yes, we see the structure.
Yeah, okay, so okay, it's working, good. So here you see the structure. At first, I am giving you a short introduction to this study, and then I'm telling you something about the key aspects of the Finnish context, since it is quite different from Anglo-American one. So I want to contextualize this study. And then I'm telling you something about what kind of bipolar spaces there are in Finland, something about the sense of belonging, and then shortly something about preliminary findings. So this study was conducted for my MA thesis, and the sample is pretty small. I only conducted 3 semi-structured interviews with Finnish BIPLUS group coordinators, and all of these coordinators also had some kind of BIPLUS identity. So they also had a personal interest in participating these groups and providing a space for BIPLUS people. So, well, the interviews were transcribed and analyzed with thematic analysis. And based on those interviews, I am trying to answer the question how these coordinators see the significance of BIPLUS spaces in Finland. In this presentation, I focus on explaining what kind of BIPLUS spaces there are in Finland, and in the end say something about how Finnish BIPLUS spaces affect a sense of belonging. I would also like to point out that throughout this research process, I have tried to keep reflexivity in mind, which is really important in both BIPLUS and feminist research. So, as a majority of the previous research on BIPLUS spaces has been conducted in the Anglo-American world, and the Finnish context is pretty different in several ways, I will give you a short presentation of the Finnish situation. This introduction is mainly based on the extensive research by the Finnish cultural anthropologist Jenni Kangasvuo. So according to Kangasvuo, there is no organized bi community in Finland, since few BIPLUS spaces we have here are not sufficient to form a separate bi community. Also, there are no Finnish organizations that would mainly focus on bi-specific issues or organizing events for BIPLUS people. That's why the largest LGBTIQ NGO called SETA, LGBTI Rights in Finland, has been the place where most of the bi activism has happened. However, SETA focuses on advocating for all the sexual and gender minorities in Finland, so bi-specific issues are not so visible on their agenda. In Kangasvuo's research, for instance, coordinating and participating BIPLUS groups were seen as forms of bi activism. What is also worth noting is that based on the previous research, in Finland, bisexuality is not typically seen as a political identity in the same sense as, for instance, lesbian. So in this presentation, BIPLUS space refers to what Bo Scotton is calling bicentered spaces, so discursive, virtual, and material spaces that center bisexual identity. And I am focusing on those material spaces. So there are only few BIPLUS spaces in Finland. There are no gatherings aimed at all the BIPLUS people in Finland, but there are some local BIPLUS groups that have regular meetings. These groups are mainly organized by some of SETA's local member organizations. However, there is one exception, which is a group for bi women in the capital region organized by a feminist NGO. These groups exist only in a few of the largest cities in Finland, so there are no bi plus spaces outside of those cities. These groups are for discussing bi plus issues and identities, as well as hanging out with other bi plus people. As there is no organized bi community in Finland and only few bi plus spaces, I am interested in exploring if bi plus groups provide a sense of belonging to some extent. Belonging can be defined as emotional attachment, feeling at home and feeling safe, as Yuval Davis does. This is especially important for bi plus people, since they can face biphobia and bi erasure also within gay and lesbian communities. In the previous research, bi plus spaces have been described as bisexual homes. Clay Hemmings has written how these homes provide a safe refugee from a biphobic outside world and are spaces where one both recognizes oneself and is recognized in return. So there is something about the preliminary findings or things. So one of the things I noticed is that the role of bi plus spaces in providing a sense of belonging were related to the connection and experiences of the Finnish rainbow community, or how the participants were, what kind of experiences participants had of those. One of the participants had found bi plus groups as personally significant just after she had found her bi plus identity and needed a space to discuss her identity and experiences. At the point of the interview, in her words, nowadays it is more about that it would be nice to be part of making possible for people that kind of meeting, that you find your peers. But maybe to me, when it comes to that identity, I don't feel like I might get or need support from the group in that way anymore. So basically, she wanted to provide this kind of space for other people who, because she had found it important for her in the past, but nowadays she felt a strong sense of belonging to the rainbow community. And she was saying that she wasn't really longing for more bi spaces or events because she really fitted into Zeta's activities and wasn't really longing for something else. And at the point of the interview, she described her identity as a lesbian with bi tendencies. I suggest that this finding is similar to what Emil Maljepaard says in his article on the Dutch bi communities as temporary support groups. You could say the bi plus group has acted as a temporary support group before and while this participant became active within the Finnish rainbow community. But can I now? Okay, no. So yeah. On the other hand, there were some clear examples of how discussing and spending time with other bi plus people provided a unique sense of belonging. For instance, another participant described how in some discussions you get that kind of sense of belonging when someone is talking about their experience and you recognize it, and we talk about these shared things that can be some lighter issues or some bigger problems. I think it is the very best thing that you get that kind of feeling that you are somehow seen and others understand you at some deeper level, when they understand something that others do not necessarily understand in the same way. This participant and also the third one had experiences of not totally being accepted as members of the rainbow community. I suggest that this was one of the reasons why they felt a stronger longing for a sense of belonging and community 5+ spaces could provide. Both of them were also non-binary, and they gender amplified their experiences of exclusion within the broader rainbow community. So for them, 5+ groups had provided experiences of belonging to some extent, but still they were longing for more bi spaces and possibly the bi community. One of the participants described their desire for more bi spaces in the following way. I would like to have more events or spaces for bi+ people, especially because of this community, but also because it would make bisexuality more visible. It would be good to have spaces for bi people or activities promoting bi rights or increasing bi visibility. So basically, they felt that having more bi spaces would provide a sense of community and belonging, but also increase bi visibility, which was an important political goal for them. And this last extract is really long, so I'm not going to read this loud totally. But basically, the participant describes how they feel that bi+ people are a significant but an invisible part of the Finnish rainbow community. For this reason, they would like to have something that is clearly aimed at bi+ people, but they are not totally sure what that would be. So here were some of my short preliminary thoughts based on the data and topic. And here are the references I was using. And so, yeah, thank you. And I think we have some time to questions if you have some.
Thank you very much, Mina. Yes, we do have time for questions.
Thank you for your comments. And this was actually the first time I am presenting this in conference, so I was a bit nervous, but good to hear that it was validating. Yeah.
Where my mind's at the moment is so far, I believe we've had a welcome contrast. The first speaker, Josephine, showed us some work out of the San Francisco Bay Area, which it tends to be pretty open and established as far as the gay community in relative terms. Whereas Mina has shown us some emergent bi+ spaces. Also in the chat, Victor was providing some corroborating thoughts, which I believe have a backdrop of India. So if you want to continue that conversation in the chat, feel free to do so. While I figure out how to get the pre-recording for the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you. There are some questions which I like answer them now or just in the chat or how?
Go ahead and answer them if you can.
So yeah, have you found that your research has affected your relationship with bi spaces and community? Yeah, I think it has. I think it has basically strengthened my identity, I think, because it has been maybe, like I said, that bisexuality isn't usually so political identity in Finland. So basically, so yeah, it has affected. Yeah, and it has been really like important also for my identity and like, yeah. But yeah, thank you a lot.
I'm going to likewise do the introduction for these folks and then try to play the video. Once the video starts, if someone just could confirm in chat whether or not the sound appears, that would be helpful. Thank you. Up next, we have Carmen Esparza and Aisha Hoyderding from the College Collective in the Netherlands. They're going to be talking about BIPOC and BIPOC intersectional identities and experiences. Carmen and Alicia are presenting today as part of the College Collective, which is an organization for and by queer people of color striving for a safer, more inclusive society. Their presentation was crafted out of their conviction that BIPOC identities are intersectional, especially that of BIPOC people of color, Black, Indigenous, and etc. Based on our own intersectional experiences and an art piece by BIPOC, they want to address relevant issues to the community. So let's see what they have for us.
And experiences. My name is Carmen Esparza, and this is Aisha Hoyderding. We work with an organization called the Colored Collective. The Colored Collective is an organization for and by queer people of color.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Aisha Hoyderding, and I'm a bisexual queer woman of color. I would say that I'm Black or mixed race. My roots are in West Africa, but I grew up in Germany, and I have lived there my whole life until I moved to the Netherlands for my studies in political science, international relations. So I was socialized in a very white environment, and throughout my life, I've dated both men and women. Yeah, Carmen, what about you?
Thank you. Let's see. Yeah. So again, my name is Carmen Esparza. I identify as a queer woman of color with a bisexual experience, as well as the woman of color experience. And a lot of my experience has been more on the inside. I was born and raised in the south of the US. My father is Mexican, my mother is white American, and I grew up in predominantly POC communities. There was a lot of internalization there. So I realized growing up that how people saw me on the outside wasn't necessarily how I saw myself on the inside. So Aisha, we have a large topic today.
Yes.
What are we getting into?
Well, so we decided from the Colored Collective team, the two of us have worked together before, so we decided to team up for this BIPLUS research conference. And I think really our starting point was that we realized when we were talking about our bisexual experience within the queer community and in society, that it was really inseparable from us being women of color, so that there is some sort of an intersection between the both. And we found that really intriguing. So that kind of started us off. In the beginning, we wanted to take a more research-centric approach. But when we were in the process, starting those conversations in the early stages, we realized how hard it was actually to separate our lived experience as bisexual women of color from what we were talking about. So we decided that it is important and is actually very valuable to talk about our lived experience. And that is what you see today, that process of the two of us integrating the topics of bisexuality and being Black and of color together, that intersection. Yeah.
So we're bringing it together for each of us. We will each be speaking from our own experience, from how we see life, how life has seen us in many ways. And I have to say, it was very confrontational moments sometimes when we were talking about our experience in preparation for this conference. We inevitably realized that unfortunately a lot of our experiences was always centering the white cis hetero male. And I think both of us realized how shocking that was, even if we weren't necessarily around that. But in nature, being from society, existing within society. That was kind of what we realized. And that was a little difficult, but nonetheless, we're going to start our conversation there. We're going to center the white cis hetero male, and then we're going to talk about our experiences based on that.
Yeah, let's get started.
So here we are. Can you take us through kind of the development of what we've created here?
Yes. So the way our process started was that we actually just mind mapped a lot, and we had a lot of conversations with each other, and we realized how naturally that flowed and how that was a very healing experience for the both of us. So we decided that today we kind of wanted to take you through our thought process and through that mind mapping together. And yeah, I think for me, what really stood out was that I, as a Black woman, as a queer woman, often feel very fetishized by society, but especially by white cis hetero men. But also that there is a certain like internalized fetishization due to socialization in this society. And then I came to this term of weaponized otherness and exotification. So that really for me meant I know that I'm being fetishized based on my body and my skin color and my identity, my sexuality. What do I do with that? Can I use that to my advantage? Like within this society, this bubble that I am in, how can I operate with the identity that I have? Like kind of submitting to the white cis hetero gaze, playing the game. How can I do that? I don't know, Carmen, like what resonated with you when it came to
Yeah,
that?
so as we created this together, for me, we labeled it as the game, essentially, right? We're playing this game. And the game, you can see on the left side, the game is essentially the game that white cis hetero men created, and we're all kind of just living it. We're all playing it. And the idea is to stay within the game and to keep playing the game, because essentially that's where value is held within society and for ourselves as individuals, a reflection from the outside to the inside that that's where our value is. What we don't want to do is go on that other side of that line, and it's a very thin line, to where then we lose our value. We lose our value in the workplace. We lose our value in partnerships and in dating, walking on the street, how we're seen in public. And a lot of times we internalize that to what is the value that we hold for ourselves, and how do we measure our own measuring sticks for value. So again, this game that we're playing, and I think it's what you're saying, is that if depending on how each of us has kind of had that lived experience, you being a very visible woman of color, I have the advantage and disadvantage of being very white passing and being very straight passing at times by how I present myself in a very high feminine way. So it's easier for me to stay within kind of that circle and keep playing that game. And I know one aspect we talked about is how do we play up our different parts, these two intersectionalities of being identifying as a woman of color as well as this bisexual experience, and how much information we tell people and how much information we keep to ourselves in order to stay within that game realm, essentially in order to keep that value.
Yeah. Can you maybe, and maybe we can both do that, take us through how that differs when you're talking to white cis hetero men? How do you present yourself? And when it comes to white women, what are the differences for you and how you weaponize or not weaponize that otherness, that exotification?
So I realized that with white cis hetero men, I like letting them assume that I'm straight, because then I get to charm them. And by that, I mean, I lead sometimes with my sexuality, not overtly, but implicitly, in order to make deals, right? In order to negotiate contracts, in order to do the work that I do. It's actually very valuable for me to keep that piece of me where there's still a little bit of mysteriousness there. So if I let them assume that I'm straight, then on that same level, I play up my POC-ness. So I speak more Spanish in conversation with them, or I'm more vibrant as a person, right? All of these things based on stereotypes to the Latina community, which is how can I portray that more, still within the palatable context, but assumingly if I'm straight. For women specifically, and this can be white women, women of color across the board, especially with white women though, my high femininity seems to be more of a competitive nature there. So what I do is that I actually share the fact that I'm queer. I share the fact, and I specifically use the term queer and not bisexual, but I share the fact that I'm queer in order to basically tell them that I am in no competition for them. There is no need for them. Exactly. I am not a threat. I'm not trying to, quote unquote, steal your man in any way. Please continue to be my friend. Don't see me as competition.
Yeah.
We are on the same level playing field. And for yourself.
Yeah, I found that actually extremely interesting in our conversation, because you told me that, and it was the moment that I realized for myself, but also we together, that there is that added layer of even though we both identify as bisexual women of color, that difference between you having the advantage and disadvantage of being white passing really does make a difference when it comes to this topic. So for me, as a Black woman, and I'm mixed, but I know that the outside world perceives me as Black. Therefore, I know that I'm being stereotyped and othered in almost every conversation and interaction I have, especially when it comes to white, cis, hetero men. So there's such a big and also historical context of sexualizing, over-sexualizing Black women that I actually do not feel there is any advantage to me further exotifying and fetishizing myself. So it is something that I would never play into when it comes to my appearance, for example. Like, I wear a lot of oversized clothing, so no one can see how my body looks and make assumptions based on that. So I think that for, at least in my perception and my lived experience, for Black women, this circle that you see, the stay inside, this is your game, there's a lot more scrutiny around that circle, and the line is much more thinner to be on the outside and hold no value, essentially.
Yeah.
When it comes to, sorry, yes?
I just wanted to say, as you were saying with wearing looser clothing, and I was like, see, that's another thing I do in order to play up that exoticness. If I want them to assume that I'm straight, is that I wear tight clothing, and I'm very comfortable in that. And that's, of course, been perpetuated also within the Mexican and larger Latinx community. But yes, that is something that I also play to my advantage.
Yes, definitely. And I noticed that with white, cis, hetero women, I actually do the exact opposite in a way that I really want us to have a shared experience. So if I wanted to play to my advantage, I do not share that I'm queer, because I know I'm being othered already on so many layers, like my body, my skin tone, that it actually is in my benefit to let them assume I'm straight, because I'm also very straight passing, because we have a shared experience. So I am staying on the inside of that circle, that game, by letting them assume I'm straight. And I found that really, really interesting, the different layers to that lived experience of otherness for the both of us.
Yeah, and just trying to play the game, right? And what was given to us, both identifying as bi plus women of color. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
You know what? Unfortunately, we have only so much limited time, and this is a really layered, convoluted, beautifully complex situation at this intersection. And one thing I really want to leave with is the letter that I wrote at the bottom corner. And essentially it addresses queer women that I find attractive and that I'm in relationships with. And I can still have relationships with white cis hetero men in a very different way that I do with my fellow women of color and queer women of color. And the takeaway that I want to share there is that I feel safer with them in the bedroom. Whereas
Yeah.
for men, white cis hetero men, I feel safer with them out on the streets. And that really is that layer of society that we're getting at, which is how do we play this game for us? But what happens on the outside? And then what happens on the inside? And on the inside, I do feel emotionally, mentally, physically less exotification coming in there when it comes to those in that intimate space.
Yeah, that share that lived experience with you, right? So
Yeah.
I think we titled it The Paradox of Intimacy in a way.
Mm.
That there is that added layer of safety when you, as a bisexual person or as a bi plus person, when you are with a white cis hetero man in the public sphere, but in the private sphere and on the inside, like the internal, something very different is happening. And I really found your letter very, very beautiful. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing it. And I think it's a great takeaway.
Yeah, I mean it's a beautiful letter. I mean it wholeheartedly. But again, right, it does still center white cis hetero men. We can't get away from that, and that's something that I want to reiterate again is that we can talk about that centering white cis hetero men as we're talking about in our association with them, but really even when we're in a bedroom with a queer woman of color, someone who we can be intimate with on multiple layers and depthness, there's still a centering there that exists with white cis hetero men. We are both those two individuals in that space. We are still what exists on greater society still exists within that bedroom. It's just how in which we approach it. So what's our takeaway, Aisha?
Well, our takeaway, I think you started us off with what you just said very greatly, because I think, yes, we realize that that is the center, and society, obviously, and the institutions that society has created is laid out for the white cis hetero male. But I think it is more what we do within that gaze, within that game, the awareness that comes with living with our identity in society, how we can heal the parts that have been hurt through the white cis hetero male and through that society that we are in, and finding community and people that share this struggle with us. And I think that is a great opportunity, like a conference like this, to share a lived experience. There's so much value in it. And yeah, I think for us it was really healing to confront this fact that this is how we feel, if we like it or not. It's not a nice thing to admit, right? But it's a great takeaway to shape the relationships that we live and the people that we surround ourselves with. So that would be my my leaving it off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
definitely,
just
I
yeah. Do you
agree.
agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big feat, right? This is a large mountain that we're trying to climb here. When we say this, we say it very simply, but I completely agree. I mean, that's the goal, right? Decentering that, centering ourselves and our
Yeah,
own community and who we find valuable within our community, and then go from there. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this conversation.
Mm.
And listening to our thoughts and our feelings, essentially, our lived experience. Yeah, do you want to finish us off with anything else, Carmen?
Thank you, everyone, very much for joining us here today. My name is Carmen Esparza. This is Aisha Hoyerding. We come from an organization called the Colored Collective. This was a small little piece inside of our minds that we are very happy to share with you. Look Colored Collective up on Instagram and Facebook as well. And we also have a website, and get to know us more and the work that we do within the queer POC community. And thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Bye bye.
Ciao.